Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm highly concerned. I think America needs to be highly concerned about the perception of Syrians. Perception is reality. And if there's a growing resentment because we're not doing enough, that does not bode well for us long term. I heard a rather chilling story, Mr. Chairman, about a mother in a refugee camp, generally supportive of America, but who was telling about her son who believes we should be doing more, and her basic comment was, "He is your enemy for life." And that's not good. Mr. Singh, do you believe it's enough in terms of bringing this conflict to an end? Because I think that is the solution. We're simply not going to solve this humanitarian crisis without really toppling the Assad regime. Is it enough for the United States not to stand in the way of other countries of providing arms? Can we get by with that strategy? Does that have any chance of success?
I don't think that's a policy, personally. I think not opposing others doing something is essentially saying, no comment on that. I don't think that's a position the United States can take in this region. This is the most, in a sense, one of the most important, most urgent national security problems in this region. Our allies in this region look to us for leadership. And I think simply saying we're not going to oppose what others are doing is not providing leadership.
I'll be the first to admit, I don't envy anybody the task making these decisions. These are enormously complex situations. Can either of you explain why the administration has not been more forward, more helpful in terms of military aid? What has been the underlying reluctance?
I hesitate to speak for the administration.
Well, I'm just in terms of what you've seen on the ground. What is the danger of greater U.S. involvement? It's a really legitimate question.
I believe there should be more U.S. involvement. Obviously, I've made the case to you all that I don't think humanitarian aid is going to be enough. It's certainly not going to be enough to convince Syrians that the United States is on their side, if that's the goal that we want to pursue. It is an incredibly difficult, dangerous, and complicated situation. So I don't blame anyone who looks at this and fears the uncertainties and the consequences of going in. You might be able to save a lot of lives, but then you have to think, if you're the president, what is the step that comes after that and after that? So I don't blame people for hesitating and for asking really tough questions of proponents of getting more deeply involved. But I do think one has to ultimately consider what are the consequences of not getting involved. The thing that Mr. Guterres said that really struck me, because I hadn't focused on it enough yet, is this rapid acceleration of the refugee flow to other countries. If it is indeed going to be 1 million per country, as he suggested, that's not sustainable. It's just not sustainable. And so I think the question policymakers need to consider is, if we're not going to solve this crisis entirely by then, which I think is unlikely, can there at least be an area inside Syria that can be safe enough for people to be able to stay there or to go back there and to survive there, so that you do not have a burden on Lebanon and Jordan and Turkey and Iraq that is going to create mayhem throughout the region?
Mr. Singh, do you believe if the U.S. got more involved, let's say we directly supplied arms, could this conflict be brought to an end by supplying the opposition forces with arms? Or is this going to require air support or a greater involvement by NATO or some other first world power?
In my view, look, first I completely agree. This is a very hard problem, and having been in the position of having had to make recommendations to a previous president on problems like this, I don't envy my colleagues in the administration now who have to do this. And obviously, committing any kind of military force is a tremendously weighty decision that requires a lot of careful thought. My own view is that, look, we should be aiming to end this conflict quickly as possible, I think, because I think the longer it drags out, the worse the consequences will become, and the harder it will be to salvage anything stable and peaceful afterwards. We can't forget that Syria was known for being a more tolerant, cosmopolitan society before all of this, and there's a danger of losing that, and that would be a real loss, I think, for this region and for us. So I would say we should look at doing both sides of this, at seeing what we can do to degrade Assad's forces, and I do think that means addressing his air power and his missile forces, which is what he's increasingly relying upon. And that probably means some kind of airstrikes inside Syria. I also think we should be looking at bolstering the opposition forces, but obviously not just willy-nilly. Obviously, we want to be helping to build a security force or security forces which will be useful after Assad leaves as well to secure the country and ensure that all the minorities are protected and that any kind of sectarian bloodletting is avoided.
Okay, so again, the concern in terms of consequences are not only just more bodies, but also spilling over into the greater Middle East and just having a far larger problem than what we have right now. Is that basically your concerns?
That's absolutely right. I think you worry about the spillover into other regions, and obviously we saw yesterday missiles being fired in northern Lebanon. You worry about the economic consequences. Some of these economies in the region are very fragile right now, like Jordan's. I think you also worry about the radicalization of the population in Syria, as well as the disintegration of Syria and the attendant conflicts that could give rise to in the region.
Well, a failed state is another real consequence there, as well as now we just heard reports of apparent chemical weapons use, and that's another real problem unless we bring this to a close sooner rather than later. That's all I have. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you both.